You're listening to the Labrador Podcast with me, Vicky Sharp. This season is about conversations with Labrador owners who are sharing their real life stories, real life experiences and lessons they've learned along the way. Every Labrador has a story, and I hope you enjoy listening to these. Hello and welcome back to the Labrador Podcast. Today's guest is Pete, and the story you'll hear may feel really familiar if you've had a young Labrador. Pete did everything he thought he was supposed to do. He went to puppy classes, threw himself into training, and was completely committed to giving Bonnie the best possible start in life. But despite all that effort, life with a young working line dog was overwhelming. In this episode, we're going to talk about the challenges of raising an energetic young dog, the pressures many owners place upon themselves, and how sometimes the biggest changes happen when we change our own approach rather than expecting the dogs to change. Pete, thank you so much for joining me. Let's kick it off with introducing our listeners to Bonnie. So tell us her age, her colour, what she looks like, and a little bit about her breed makeup.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. So Bonnie is coming up 3 years old. She is a black Goldador. So she is a second generation Goldador. So her mum is 100% lab, and her dad is a kind of 50% lab, 50% golden retriever. She is pretty much a kind of take anywhere, do anything dog. She's incredibly active. We go running 3 times a week. She's on a group walk twice a week. We walk 3 times a day. She's incredibly friendly. She kind of just loves people and just really good fun to be around. Just very much enjoy being with her.
And Pete, you have a smile on your face when you do talk about her, so I know she's pretty special to you.
Absolutely.
You mentioned she's a Goldador, so she's part Labrador, part Golden Retriever. Was that always the aim when you were going to get a dog? Had you heard about that, or did you discover it as you were searching for a dog and the Goldador just happened to come up?
Yeah, so I think when the opportunity came up where I think, we could have a dog, I guess the most important thing for us was about having a dog which was, I guess, perfect family dog. That was really kind of what we were looking for. Did my research. I did want a bigger dog. That was one of the things I did want. And when I was doing my research, obviously you come across the Labrador, you come across Golden Retriever. And then one of the things that caught my eye was a Goldador. And, the more I looked into it, I think the Guide Dogs UK, I think 60% of their dogs are Goldadors. And I think the idea is that, the cross kind of brings out the best of both breeds. They're both obviously amazing breeds, and it kind of brings out, the best parts of those. And I think the more I kind of looked into it, this is something that, I really thought, this is going to be, really kind of perfect for our family. So that kind of set me down the road of going after a Goldador.
And how did you kind of find it? Did you find the dog first? So looking through the internet, did you go, oh, that's a really cute puppy, we need to go and see that litter? Or did you find a particular breeder that you liked the look of and then happen to get a puppy from them?
I would say I was quite cautious. I'd done kind of my homework, obviously kind of, listened to friends and their kind of experiences. You kind of read things, hear things over the years. So I was quite cautious. I'd initially made a phone call, which took quite a long time to make the call, to be honest. It's, it's a big step, isn't it? It's a huge step. And unfortunately, the timings didn't quite work out. So that didn't go well. So I think there was probably quite a long period, maybe like a couple of months or so went by. And then there was somebody who actually quite far away, was down in Somerset, were advertising. And one of the things that kind of drew me to them was that, one had, just talked so passionately about their pups, but also they wanted to have their pups back for holidays. They were very much around kind of, including you in the journey, including you after you've taken your pup. And it was something that really kind of drew me, because I was thinking, if you've got somebody who wants to see them afterwards. This is kind of all the things that make you feel a little bit nervous about buying a dog. Suddenly you've kind of got this kind of comfort here. And I gave him a call, we kind of hit it off, and it was actually a really lovely journey. So I think the pups were maybe about 3 weeks old. Immediately you're part of like a Facebook group, lots of, videos, photos, all that sort of thing. Got to visit the pups about 3 times before we finally collected. In fact, he actually held on to Bonnie for a couple of weeks. We were actually away on holiday. So he, was good enough to kind of hold her I think she was just with one of her siblings and her mother and half sister. And then we picked her up at 11 weeks old. But, it was kind of all these things that I guess you kind of feel nervous about, still very much in touch with the breeder. Bonnie goes for holidays with the breeder. In fact, the breeder's actually popping by tomorrow, believe it or not. Even though he's in Somerset, he's got another litter that one of them is actually local to the area I'm in. So he's going to pop through, drop in with that pup and meet Bonnie. They met, I think, probably about 6 months ago. So yeah, all kind of
Pete,
worked out well from that perspective.
it sounds really good with that supportive kind of group around you, the breeder and the other pups. I think the breeder coming to see you tomorrow sounds really dangerous though, because if he's bringing a puppy with him, you're going to be thinking about a new puppy soon, aren't you?
It's happened. So this actually, the puppy from this litter that he's bringing, there was many conversations, and yeah, I was very tempted. But I think ultimately I made the right decision. I think for me, I would love another pup more than anything. I really would. But, with Bonnie, we've got so much more to do. I think there's so much more I can get from her. We've got such a great relationship. So it's on ice, I would say. Certainly at some point, I'd love to.
A lot of people kind of think we should get another dog at some point. And people always ask me when is the right time. And actually it's so different. It's different for every family, different dog, different handler. And I've had multiple dogs together at one time, and sometimes it's been brilliant, it's lovely. Other times it's been an absolute disaster, and the dogs just are not ready for a sibling and they don't particularly get on. And it's always a bit of a gamble. And I think if you've got a really solid life with Bonnie at the moment and you know where you're going and what you're working on, there's definitely no rush. I'm sure she'd love a brother or sister in the future, but there's loads of time, absolutely loads of time. The breeder that you got Bonnie from, do you know if she's from a working line or a show line?
But I have to admit, this is one of the areas I did not know about before I took Bonnie on. It didn't really, I tell you what's quite crazy is I don't know how it doesn't really necessarily come up in kind of your searches and discussions. I now know that I think her mother is from working lines and the father is more the kind of show lines. And I discovered that quite early on. I have to admit that came out quite early on. And then I did my research and I was like, right, okay, this is something new.
And I think that's very common. People don't necessarily understand there is a difference, because if we think just about Labradors and Golden Retrievers, actually, our minds tend to go towards more of the show line when we visualize what a Labrador or a Golden Retriever is. That's kind of what our brains tell us. It's, the slightly chunkier, more sedate, long in Golden Retriever with the longer fur potentially. That's where I think our mind goes. And then we go, oh, actually, we've bought something that's a little bit different from what we expected. How far into that journey had you got before you thought, actually, she's a great dog, but maybe not what I visualized?
Yeah, and I think it's probably when she matured a little bit, and I mean, probably, I don't know, maybe like 4 months old, 5 months old, and it was, we're kind of in the park, and it was that prey drive, and the very first time that happened, I don't know if it was a bird, a squirrel, whatever it was, and it was just that feeling of, whoa, that's new. Because my parents had a dog growing up. I grew up with a dog. I think my dog was like 9 months old when I was born. It was a small lassie dog and no prey drive whatsoever. It wasn't something I'd ever, I guess, kind of encountered. I think at that moment when that happened, as to say, this is like quite serious now. Like, this is something I need to really kind of, I didn't know what to do. I had no clue what to do, how to do it. But yeah, that was my first experience, and it was a real kind of like, what have we done moment. It was one of those ones where you think, this is, I don't know what to do here.
Would you say there were other moments like that in let's say the first couple of months of bringing her home? So even when she's, I think you said 11 weeks when you brought her home. So people often find the first few weeks very tough with the biting and the chewing and trying to keep this cute, fluffy thing amused. Was it how you expected or very different?
I say I'd done a lot of work before we got her. Luckily, like I said, I think we first kind of chose her out, kind of picked her when she was about 3 weeks old. So we had quite a long period to prepare, kind of buying all the stuff, but also kind of mentally as well, and doing all the kind of the work there. So I think I would say that I was, I'd done my best. Obviously, nothing prepares you for it. Clearly, I'd read some, what I think are quite helpful books in the sense they were real kind of like, what do you do when your dog comes home hour 1, hour 2, hour 3? They were very much kind of books like that. So I'd say initially one of the big things was like crate training, literally within the first hour of her coming home, put her in the crate. Like all of our sleeping arrangements, I never let her sleep outside the crate. So whenever she was tired, put her in the crate. I slept downstairs with her for the first 2 weeks. I was in the kind of the downstairs bedroom just next door to where she was sleeping. Every 2 hours, set the alarm outside, outside, outside. So I said that part went fairly okay. Then I think maybe like the second week of having her, I took her to puppy classes. And one of the big things that kind of started becoming incredibly apparent was her love of dogs. She got such a high from other dogs, just complete overexcitement, completely couldn't contain herself. So that was one of the big things that I think really the whole of the first year was really all about was how on earth do I get more interesting than other dogs? That was like a really big part to deal with, as well as this kind of prey drive as well. That was, two quite major things. And you think about when you take your dog outside, you're taking this lovely puppy outside. As soon as you go through the gate, it's like, everything's kind of crazy. But I'd say one of the things that was, she's always been good at, and I think it's more, I'd probably say like in the house, at home, she's been great. And I think it's because I've been confident. I've been very clear. I've set boundaries. I've been pretty good, very consistent with her. I think when I go outside, I take her out on walks. That's when I think things really just completely broke down. I think, I'm quite introverted. I don't like to be kind of animated outside. And that's really what you need to be, right? You need to be animated. You need to be interesting. You need to kind of do all these things. And I found that really difficult to begin with. It didn't come naturally in the slightest. And I think that's really where things went wrong outside of the house. And I think there's such a divide there.
You said it doesn't come natural to you to kind of be that big, bold, interesting character, which you,
Yeah.
like you say, you need to be to entertain this dog. But Bonnie's, of course, experiencing this big, exciting new world outdoors, and you have this battle. It's like you against the world, and the world can offer so much to a young puppy. But you also said she went to training classes. When she was in those training classes, was she fairly good? Did she take to it well? And did you enjoy the experience of going to puppy classes?
So it's probably about a tale of two halves. I loved the classes personally for me because I think they gave me confidence. I was able to kind of ask questions. When you go to puppy classes, right, it's not about training the puppy, it's about training you. It's about training you as the human. And I think I desperately needed it. I lacked a lot of confidence, and I think the classes gave me confidence in terms of Bonnie, obviously complete catastrophe, disaster. You'd have divides set up, she'd be straight through them. Things got better. We did about, I think, probably 2 blocks, about 8 weeks of classes. And I say they were very much, the way I reflect on them is they're very much for me. They were very much around me gaining confidence, me being able to ask questions, being able to kind of interact with other owners. But in terms of actually what happened in the class, of course, it was absolute carnage. It was, but so I'll tell you something that's surprising was the next day in the morning, you'd be like, I don't know, down, and you'd be like, you didn't do that yesterday. It's like, what's happening? It's almost like, it's bizarre. And these guys are super clever, right? They're so smart, they're so clever, and they absorb so much. But in the moment, nothing gets absorbed. Like the class is crazy. But when you get back, it's calm, it's quiet, things do begin to happen. But I'd say the classes are very much for me on reflection.
It sounds like actually they were really helpful.
Yes,
And
they were.
you also picked up on the point that the training was for you. And I think that's a big thing that we often forget in training. For me personally, I'm seen as like a dog trainer, but I rarely actually train the dog. I train the humans to get the best from their own dog. Do you think there is benefit to everyone going to some sort of training class to refresh their knowledge? Even if you've had dogs for 20, 30 years, would you feel that it's worth maybe listeners that are thinking about getting a new puppy to go to them? Do you think it would give benefit to even an experienced owner?
I think it's a bit of a non-negotiable. And, from my perspective, when I think about, I've been to a lot of training over the years and, if I get another dog, would I do the same? Absolutely. I think you're up against two things, right? You've got the breed You need to understand the breed. That's like part one. And obviously you've had one, you understand a bit more. And the second one's the dog's personality. It's, I think you're kind of battling almost both of those. And if you've got experience of the breed, clearly that bit's good. But, every dog is different, right? And, ultimately it's almost kind of finding there's almost like a recipe, right? But in terms of the exact amount of each ingredient, I think is very different for each dog. Bonnie likes some things, responds terribly to others. And I imagine with another dog, it could be the mirror opposite of that. But I think you almost need the training to kind of find that and kind of someone to help you find that balance.
Yeah, I agree. And if you think about Bonnie's whole litter that she came from, so let's, as an example, say there were 8 of them, you could probably put all of those 8 litter mates in the same training session. And you'll probably find that they all learn in different ways. They've all got different motivations. They've all got different desires. Their handlers are ever so slightly different. And I don't think there is this, you said, recipe or textbook that says this is what you do at this time, at this scenario. And you probably found you were getting information from everywhere. Your trainer, your training classes, you mentioned books. We know the internet's a wonderful place for getting information, but it can also be a pretty dreadful place to get information. Did you find lots of different resources everywhere to help you, or did you also find it a bit of a hindrance at times?
I think it's difficult when you are going through a difficult time. I think that's when it becomes really quite, I don't use the word depressing, but almost as depressing. And I think, when I look back with Bonnie is that, we had this kind of, like I said before, we kind of had this divide, at home, things were going brilliant. Like she really was wonderful. She has this incredible off switch, even at a young age. You go out, we'll kind of talk about it in a second, but, at home, she'd just flop out. She'd do that lovely thing of flopping out. She was brilliant, absolutely wonderful. And that bit was going really, really well. But, you kind of, as soon as we went outside, you see these young dogs doing X, Y, and Z online. You see them even in the, you go down the park, you're seeing young dogs doing things. And then, it's just like, oh my God, like what am I doing? Like, is it me? And you start to really question yourself. It's like, am I wrong for this dog? Am I the wrong person? Like, have I just been like, and you just feel like you completely let her down. And, and I know a lot of it, I think with me, I was very nervy. I was very anxious, and that I don't think helped. My wife, perfect example, she got a lot from Bonnie going outside at a young age. She was, very relaxed, very chill, very outgoing, and she definitely responded differently in that situation. To me, he was on the long line, kind of pulling this thing tight. He's like, oh, no, don't do that, don't do this. And it's the worst thing you can do. So I think that's definitely something I've kind of learned.
You quite honest about it being difficult and something that actually wasn't natural to you.
Yeah.
When did that difficulty when did it kick in, and did you think, oh my gosh, what have I done? And what did it look like? Try and visualize it for people. What were you experiencing day in, day out to make it feel so tough?
I think there's probably 2 scenarios. The first scenario is just being at the park. You're kind of going on your walk and, it's a beautiful park, lovely dog owners up there, fantastic dogs. But you just dread walking past every owner. You'd absolutely dread it. And then you start to dread going out. You start to kind of go out earlier. You go out to places that are more kind of obscure where you're not going to see someone. And that's when you start knowing things are not going the right way. And I think one of my experiences was, it was at, a Gundog training class. She's a smart dog. She's brilliant. She's a fantastic dog. She does what comes naturally to her. I'd been to kind of Gundog classes initially after the puppy classes. We kind of went to Gundog classes doing, fairly basic stuff, obedience, maybe the odd retrieve or so, and all good. I kind of moved on to, I guess, what kind of a much more dedicated Gundog club, let's call it that. And, she's the youngest dog in class by, a long shot. Most of the dogs are kind of 2 years old, 3 years old, which I realise now why. And I remember letting her off for a retrieve. She was on a long line, sent her out. And of course, she's fine going out, bro. She goes out, gets the retrieve, comes back. And the first thing she sees are other dogs. And she just flies over to other dogs, jumping around. Then the instructors are trying to get her back. And at that age, she used to do this thing where she'd jump up in your face. So she's jumping up in like people's faces. I was just, oh my God, this is just like, it's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And, it makes you feel, because no one else dog's doing this, because they're all mature, aren't they? This is not what they do.
Yeah.
And so you go through this side where you want to do everything you can, but it's going wrong all the time outside. And this is the really tough bit, because outside things are terrible. It really is awful. But inside the home, in the home is brilliant. She's fantastic. She's brilliant. But outside, you just see this. It's almost like the second you leave the gate, it's like, right, where are we going? What are we doing? And that's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to deal with. And I think I dealt with it incorrectly. I think, in terms of what I should have been doing is, really making myself interesting. Really making it kind of valuable, being next to me, doing all these things. And I remember the trainer, I remember saying to me, it's like, you're boring. It's like, you need to make yourself interesting. And again, there's no comment, it wasn't aimed directly at me, as like other people as well. Other people were kind of, had other things going on, but it's very much, you've got to be interesting, you've got to be animated, you've got to be kind of, you've got to catch the dog at the right time. So timing's everything as well, right? So it's not about being animated all the time. It's about that moment. So in that example I gave where she veered off towards other dogs and kind of, completely lost her, there was a second there where I could have got her. If I was like, hey, buddy, you come here, I could have got her there and I could have brought her back, and things have been fine. And I didn't know any of this at the time either. So you kind of compound the fact that she loves other dogs. She's got the prey drive. I'm shocking as a handler. You kind of put all that together and it really doesn't add up particularly well.
I think you said two really important things there. So about being interesting, you've got to be more interesting than the rest of the world. And that doesn't just mean taking really high value treats with you. It means actually you have to be valuable to your dog, be
Yeah.
part of the fun
Yeah.
they're having. But timing is so important. And some dogs, particularly busy brained working dogs, they probably give you half a second to get it right. And if you don't get it right in that half a second, they've moved on to the next thing. And then you're trying to resolve the issue once it's already happened. So you must kind of get in there before it happens. Your trainer kindly told you were boring, and I don't think you are boring, Pete, but in the sense of a young puppy, yeah, everyone's quite boring compared to the bird that's flying around. Did your trainer find any kind of useful ways for you to kind of be more interesting?
I guess that's kind of where I learned a little bit more about tone of voice, a bit more about kind of gestures, a bit more about body language. And I think, again, I didn't really know anything about this until, this is, again, going back to your point around training. This is exactly why training's so important, because it's about teaching you. It's not about teaching, it's about teaching you as for me anyway, it's about teaching me as a handler. And I think these are all the bits I learned, is that I didn't think about body language. If I'm standing in a way that maybe looks a bit stern, a bit kind of annoyed or whatever it is, why on earth would she come back to me when I look like that? If I'm open arms, smiling, come on, boy, doing all these great things, of course she's going, it's going to make her much more likely to come back to me and listen and want to be with me, rather than just kind of be like, Bonnie, come here. And I think that's one of the big things I've learned, and that's one of the big things I still take today. It's not the fact you're going to be loud and booming, it's just the fact you've got to be doing that at the right times.
And it's very much pitch and tone of voice rather than being loud. Some people think they've just got to shout and, at the top of their voice. You don't. You can keep that kind of low level voice, but you've just got to sound a bit different and sound a bit interesting to your dog.
Yeah.
Because dogs don't actually understand the English language. It's not like they've got this word bank in their head, but they will respond to, does mum or dad sound fun, exciting and interesting? Or do they sound really cheesed off and a bit annoyed that I've, gone off to play with the other dogs first? So during that Gundog class that you were doing where she failed the retrieve and went to go and play with the other dogs, it sounds like you realised now that she was probably too young or behaving the way she did because she was younger than the more mature dogs that were in the class. Did you persevere with those classes or did you knock it on the head and did it knock your confidence?
I did persevere. So that particular course I was on, the kind of second block that I did with a different trainer, it was like I think it was like 4 or 5 weeks worth of lessons, and then you did a test at the end. And that was probably the worst thing you can do as somebody who, one, is struggling, two, is quite anxious and nervous anyway, and three is kind of dealing with quite a tough kind of situation. And the classes were brilliant. Like the training was excellent. Like the actual training was brilliant. It was the fact that being pressured to pass an exam within a very small time period with a dog that you're unable to control I think, was too much. We practiced incredibly hard. I think I probably pushed her too hard at too young an age. Would I do that again? Absolutely not. I don't think that was the right thing to do. I should have just gone to the classes, enjoyed the classes, had fun there. And that's what I should have done. Instead, I kind of was like, I don't know, I had this crazy idea, it'd be lovely to get a rosette, it'd be lovely to kind of get a certificate. And I thought that would be the right thing to do. And it was just the wrong timing, completely the wrong timing. And I think we really suffered from that. I think our relationship suffered from that. I think I pushed her too hard. I don't think it was the right thing to do. She passed her exam, so during the exam, luckily the dogs were maybe like 100 meters away. So you're really on your own and things went brilliant in the exam. She, at the end of the day, she does what comes naturally to her. She goes off, she retrieves, she's brilliant on sit stage. She does all these things, she hunts, she's brilliant on that sort of stuff. At that point in time, next to other dogs, absolute disaster. And I think after that, it was such hard work, so stressful, put such a stress on our relationship. I really didn't come back to, I didn't do I didn't do any Gundog classes after that. Into the summer, we just focused on, kind of more kind of long hikes, kind of just more kind of obedience work, really. And that's really then when she kind of came into our first season.
You mentioned that you found that Gundog training quite pressurized, or there was pressure. Was it pressure on you, pressure on Bonnie, or do you think you both felt that actually it was a pressurized situation and maybe stopped being fun for the both of you?
It was a pressurized situation. I put the pressure on myself. It was me that signed up to it. I signed up to the fact you're going to have, 4 or 5 weeks of classes, then a test, which gives you a very small period of time. And, it was pretty tough as well. It was quite a tough test. It was a little bit more than perhaps, kind of Gundog Club level 1. It was a little bit more than that. I had a couple more components to it. But I kind of did that, that was a really silly thing to have done. I shouldn't really have done that. Yeah, that was a mistake.
You then stopped doing those classes and you went off on long hikes. And it sounds like
Yep.
actually what you started doing was having more fun with Bonnie. Was that a conscious choice at the time? Or did it just kind of evolve where you thought, can the gun dog work for a bit and just do life?
I think it was a very conscious decision. I think I'd kind of got to a place where this wasn't what dog ownership was about. This was not what my vision was of having a lovely family dog. It wasn't where I wanted to be with her. So it was very much, I just want to enjoy being with her. I just want to have fun with her. And that's why I kind of, more kind of enjoyed the weekends, long walks to the pub, more of that kind of stuff. Just kind of walking rather than being like, right, you must get, out, retrieve, we kind of just put that to the side. And the crazy thing is, we kind of get to that, but, later on, these guys are hardwired to do these things. Like, they're hardwired. It's about controlling it. That's that's really what it's about. And I think that's the big lesson I learned, is that you don't teach them to retrieve. They know fine well how to do that. It's just teaching them to retrieve when you tell them to retrieve, or controlling them. And that's what it's all about. And I didn't know any of this. And I think that's why I put myself under so much pressure. And I think, I wasn't a good handler either. I really wasn't. I was very inexperienced, clearly. And I think I would have gone about it incredibly differently. Let her do what comes naturally to her is kind of more of what I would have done, rather than being like, oh, no, don't do that, don't do this. And I think that just made things 10 times worse.
Did life improve with Bonnie when you just started having fun and enjoying those day trips with her and hiking to the pub and that kind of stuff?
It was nice not having the pressure, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Look at summer, it was lovely. Yeah, absolutely. I think things did improve. Didn't feel any pressure. We just enjoyed ourselves. We just kind of did whatever we wanted to do. So absolutely, yes. I'd say yes, absolutely.
That was kind of around the same sort of time that she came into her first season.
Mm,
So
yeah.
many people with a female dog kind of dread that first season because they don't know what to expect. The dog's never experienced it before. How did it go for Bonnie?
I think she was about 11 months, which I thought was quite late. I bet a few other people whose dogs, like similar age to her, had kind of maybe come to season a little bit earlier than her. And ironically, we're actually up in Scotland at my parents'. We're staying on, my parents for a week. And it just so happened to start when we're at my parents' house. So that was good, putting pants on her and my parents and all the towels and blankets and so on. But I'd say that was it was a big turning point for us, was her kind of coming into season. And I'm still not sure whether it was maturity, or more likely it was the fact that I think maybe I earned her trust a bit more. Maybe, because I was the person who was looking after her, because she was very unsure about the whole thing. You could kind of see she was different. And maybe I was the one who was there to support her through it. And, and maybe that kind of earned I kind of earned her trust kind of through that process. It was quite long, actually. I think it ended up being like, 4, 5, 6 weeks. It was quite a long period. of time where, because we're so used to kind of going out in the countryside, so used to doing all these different things and, kind of being out in public, and then kind of having to go on roads and walk pavements it's not something either of us enjoy doing. And that was quite a tough period actually, was going through that. We did have her spayed. I think, from that perspective, we'd kind of decided that, well, not decided, it was done very, almost as soon as we got her, that, we're not doing puppies. It's not something we're going to do. We don't have time. We both work full time. It's not something we want to do. I don't think I could go through the process of kind of giving away puppies. I'd probably end up having all of them here. So I knew it was the wrong thing to, yeah.
Agree. If I were to have pups from any of my dogs, I would end up with 12 new puppies because they'd all stay with me because I'd be awful at finding them new homes. I just wouldn't want to give them up.
Yeah.
You mentioned that kind of that first season was like the turning point. And I think that's because you eased up the pressure on yourself with giving up, that stressful Gundog type training. Bonnie presumably has matured as well during that time of her first season. Do you think both of those things contributed to the fact that she kind of turned the corner at that point, or would you put it down to one over the other?
See, I still don't know which one it was. I do think it was more about the fact that I was the one there looking after her in this kind of need for her, almost this kind of, or not need for her, but almost like time of uncertainty for her. It was something new, very different. She didn't know what was going on. And what labs are like is that, if they make a mess anywhere, they don't like it, almost like, for her, if there's anything, she's like, oh my gosh, I didn't, and she kind of gets quite funny about that. And I think that, kind of being there to support her, I think was probably more the driving factor, is what I think. But ultimately, look, maturity is such a large part of it. I'm a little bit of the opinion you can't out-train maturity. I don't know if that's true or not. You've obviously got all the experience here, but certainly with Bonnie, I'm wondering whether you could even out-train maturity with her. But I think it's a mixture, but I think more leaning on the fact I was there for her during a kind of a traumatic time for her.
So she saw you as kind of the important person that was there to look after her, and you become part of her
Yes.
team. You build this
Yes.
kind of great teamwork. Did you at any point then decide to get back on track with the Gundog type training or any other type of obedience training or anything like that? Or did you still just have this big focus, like we've got a slightly more mature dog, we're just going to have fun?
I would say that we did, we got her. So we kind of went through, the period, you got to wait 3 months and so on. Then we got her spayed. I guess kind of that period leading up, there was definitely a slight difference in her for sure. I still kind of remember doing it. She was on a long line still. I mean, she was on a long line to quite late on. And I remember doing a recall whistle and just expecting nothing to happen. And she came back and it's like, okay, like she obviously came back for another reason. Well, it wasn't that, and then this became a bit more repetitive. So it was definitely this kind of, again, it was very subtle. Like we're talking very subtle differences, but differences enough that you're like, this is new. This is good. And then I think, she was spayed. And then we had this period, I don't know, it was like a 3-week period. You can't walk them. She's got to kind of be quite gentle with her walks and so on. And I think having gone through more pavement walking, I think that's where it was like, right, let's get back out. As soon as we could, we're back out in the countryside each morning. We're doing these things. And I think I probably was a lot more relaxed with her. I think I gave her the benefit of the doubt much more. And I think it was a bit of a two-way thing. She'd kind of shown me that she is able to listen. And I think it really kind of took off from there. That's when things really took off in terms of us progressing, not just in the house, but actually outside. Things were going really well. I mean, all this time, we're doing loads of things all this time, like heel work. We're doing so much work on loose lead walking, so much work on heel work. We're doing all these things in the background. It's just that it was so unreliable. That's all. And I'd say kind of, once she'd been spayed, once we kind of got into this would have been like, kind of January, start of the year, things were really beginning to improve quite quickly, is what I would say. She would have been, 15 months, 16 months. And this is really when things start to go very quickly. And, I'd always had a passion for the Gundog train. I'd always enjoyed it. There's nothing better than seeing her kind of getting the retrieve, head down, hunting, finding something, I love that side. I love the obedient side of it. I really enjoy it. And there's nothing quite like seeing her enjoying it more than I am. I love seeing that side of it. And that's really when things kind of took off for us and things, we got back into it. And then this is when, with our trainer, this is when the courses started back up again. And we were there in February, day one of the courses starting back up again. And actually, I think we ended up doing the Gundog Club level 1 and level 2, I believe, maybe like the May, June sort of time, something like that.
And is this the same training program that you did where you went and you felt like you'd gone too early with it and you felt a bit embarrassed? Is it the same group?
No, it was the initial one where we'd done puppy classes, and then progressed on to the Gundog training. It was kind of back there. It was a very relaxed atmosphere. It was good fun. In the sense that, even like at halftime, we kind of all get together, have a break. Dogs would kind of go crazy with each other and stuff. Then it's, 5-minute break back, and it was just nice. I think what I enjoyed about those classes was that there was no pressure. So every week, it was always somebody's dog who really couldn't be bothered or wanted to go and play with other dogs or whatever it was. And it was nice because there was no kind of pressure in terms of your dog having to perform. There's no pressure in terms of you being embarrassed. It was, everyone had their turn every week. It was always somebody's dog, right? It was always somebody's. And the next week they'd be brilliant. And then it'd come full circle again. It was always like that. And it was good fun. I think that really was exactly what I needed at that point, where I needed something quite relaxed, needed something, where I didn't feel pressurized. I could kind of go at my own pace. And also I'd been through the material already. So it wasn't kind of like brand new stuff. It was more just going over things we had done, I don't know, like 6 months ago. And I tell you, the funny thing about that is that it was so much more fun doing it with a mature dog. It was just a totally different experience, completely different experience. Bonnie was totally different. I was totally different. And the results were totally different. It wasn't this kind of like hanging on knife edge. Is she? Oh no, I don't know if she's going to do it. I don't know if she's going to do it. It's much more around, yeah, it's fine. We've done this 100 times. It's fine. Yeah, I'm going to go once. Yeah, I'm go. And it was very relaxed and it was nice. It was good fun. Enjoyed it.
Maturity in a dog can definitely help with so much. You just get more brain space and more capacity for learning and good stuff to happen. But it sounds like the type of training you had took a lot of pressure off you as the handler as well. And I imagine much more fun than the kind of stressful situation of knowing you've got to do tests. Did you pick up lots of things that you were doing in that class that then translate into everyday real world type stuff that you can do on walks and stuff that you can do to entertain Bonnie when you're on a call at work, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think that, when we go for walks, we walk, but it's not a walk, if that kind of makes sense. Sometimes I'll take the rucksack out with all the dummies that we've got. Some days I'll just take the ball out, start with a lot of obedience work. So we do a lot of stop whistle, we do a lot of sit stays, then we move on to different types of retrieves. We, just kind of do all sorts. And I think, you kind of get all these ideas from these courses. Then it's more about kind of applying it, about wherever you go. So even in the park, like today, I had to kind of jump back for work. We only had 20 minutes in the park. We live opposite the park. We're really fortunate. It's a beautiful park on a hill. We've got woodland. We've got long grasses. It's perfect kind of training territory. I just took, I think it was one of these little tug toys that fitted in my pocket. I can sit her down. I'll throw it in there, send her out, just sniffing. Next one, went to a memory. I'll drop it down. We'll walk up to the top of the hill. Then I'll send her down. And you do like 4 or 5 of these, and it's not training. It's not like it's formal. It's hugely informal. I make it up as I go along, just kind of, and she almost kind of dictates the pace slightly. Like we'll never do anything for the first 5 minutes. She'll go to the toilet. She'll kind of have a sniff around. She might play with some other dogs. Don't even bother with her in those 5 minutes. Just let her do her thing. And then after that, it's just trying to more about kind of taking the opportunity as it kind of comes up. And if there's long grass, she's not watching, like, let's chuck this in there and we'll kind of get her to hunt for it. And that's the bit I really enjoy about it, is you kind of take these Gundog principles, take these kind of things you've learned, but then kind of apply them in a way which is, fun, it's interesting, it's new, it's different. So every walk we do is completely different. We kind of mix up directions, we mix up all these different things. So everything's always very, very different.
You've mentioned it's informal, but a huge amount of fun, presumably for both of you, because you're spending time doing what you and Bonnie like doing. you ended up with a working line Goldador, and you've introduced work to her in Gundog training, and that forms part of everyday life. Do you feel actually, as an owner of a Gundog breed, that it is really important to give them that job, that outlet that they are bred to do?
Absolutely. I think it's almost imperative. There's nothing like seeing them going out and getting that retrieve, like seeing how happy they are, kind of coming back. I think just giving them a job, whether it's like a sit stay, just something really basic like a sit stay. Um, you know, seeing them kind of, you can see them, they're concentrating. They're like, this, I can do this, Dad, I can do it, I can do it. And being able to kind of call her back and being so happy to come back in and everything, life is brilliant again. And I think doing all these different things, it's so important. And I kind of judge myself a little bit around how tired she is when she comes home. Like if she's had to think and like exercise, I said to you before, we do a lot of running together. She'll run, I don't know, 25, 30 miles a week with me. Doesn't matter. It's not going to tire her out at all. What tires her out is that thinking. When she's using her head, she's having to think. That's what exhausts her. And today we had quite an extended session actually. Where we kind of found a new area we could train in. It was really good fun. And this area here, it's actually where a lot of deer graze. It's where there's kind of foxholes there. So the smells are crazy anyway. And then you're trying to kind of get her to do different types of retrieves, doing ladder work, all these different things. And she's battling so hard not to kind of sniff the ground while concentrating on this kind of getting the retrieve, the obedience side, all this sort of stuff. And she came back and my wife was like, what have you done to her? She literally came in the front door, collapsed. And usually, in the morning, I'll kind of get coffee and stuff. I'll go upstairs. She usually comes upstairs, sits on the sofa in the bedroom while we're getting ready. She just laid on the floor, just absolutely out of it. And I kind of judge a little bit around, that's her happiness, is that if she's so exhausted mentally that she is kind of like that, then you've done a good job. And I know physically I couldn't do that, but doing all these different things, kind of the Gundog theme stuff is that, I know I can exhaust her. I know I can do it. It doesn't take particularly long either. You do the hunting, you put something in long grass, you send her out, kind of whistle over here, whistle, you kind of get her to quarter, or you get her to kind of find it, and you do a handful of those and you won't hear from her for the whole day.
It's really important what you said there, because what you're doing is you're working Bonnie's body physically, but you're working her brain massively by just getting her to think. And you do notice such a difference. A really fulfilled dog has used their brain and their body, and she's getting both of those. Just before we get back to today's episode, if you'd like some help with your own Labrador, I'd love to hear from you. At Tales of Success Labrador Training, I help owners with everything from puppies and adolescents through to loose lead walking, recall, behaviour challenges, Gundog foundations and scent detection training. So if you'd prefer to train in person, online or through home visits anywhere in the UK, there is something to suit you. You can contact me by visiting talesofsuccess.com. Thanks for listening. Now let's get you back to today's episode. There will be people listening to this that have got a working line dog that currently don't do any kind of Gundog work or any formal training as far as work goes. But there is lots actually that you can do without going to any classes. If you're out there in a field playing fetch with a tennis ball with your dog, rather than just chucking it, go hide it in some long grass and then let them go and sniff it out, go and find it. That in itself is a good bit of work you can do just to introduce them to hunting, using their nose and using their brain. What advice would you give to owners that are in the position where they think, do you know what, this Gundog work sounds like it could be fun. It sounds like it could work for my dog. How would you say people are going to go about starting to introduce it, whether it's on their own or going to find a decent training class to learn the skill?
I mean, I think certainly as a first timer, I think definitely going to a class is the way ahead. You'll be in with a group of people who are kind of, like-minded. You'll be in a class with people who probably the first time kind of being there. And I think that's where, at least you're with people who, are kind of in similar situations to yourself. And, I think you go through these classes and it's amazing how much you can take away from those and, apply in your everyday, like even at the garden. It's amazing with the garden, it doesn't matter the kind of size of it. You hide something, send the dog out, even if you send the dog out from inside, where they can't see. And, that's a game in itself. Hide the ball in the garden. We're lucky here. We've got like a wraparound garden. We kind of put it in the front, hide something in the back. You can send her around. So you don't even, have to leave the house. you do a handful of those and they're absolutely exhausted. So I think, going to the class is imperative. I wouldn't have learned anything as much as I have done had I not been to those classes. You've got the kind of benefit of being able to kind of speak to somebody live, ask lots of questions, you're getting tuition, being able to kind of, see where you're going wrong in certain things. And, a lot of the time, even when you're doing these things, in terms of where you go wrong, it's so subtle. It's always little small things like you might be standing a certain way that doesn't look, or that you're standing different ways, and the dog kind of gets a sense of, why is it different? Why, what's going on here? So class is definitely the way to start. And, there's so much stuff online in terms of, getting creative with things. And, even if it just advances to, let's say, hiding a ball in the grass, it's amazing how many fun situations you can make out of that. So even something like a fetch it, I think people don't like these little, kind of chuck it things. Is
Yeah.
it chuck it called?
Yeah.
We've got a chuck it, or we'll do a couple of the chuck it in the park a couple of times a week. And then you kind of have fun with that. And then once you kind of advance, you're able to get her to sit next to you, then you chuck it quite far away, then you send her out. And that's, things can kind of, you just start advancing. There's so many variations of things that you can do.
Social media gives us lots of great information. We have videos all the time of people doing great Gundog work. And I think some people probably get put off by that because they think, I could never do that. My dog is never going to be good enough to achieve that. The advice I would give people is you don't need to be brilliant at it, but you do need to have fun and your dog needs to have fun. It doesn't actually matter how good you are at it, but it's something that works the brain and the body. And you've described two different types of training class, I think. One where you found it fun and engaging, and another one where you found it too pressurized. If you were looking back and choosing the right type of training for you, what would be your red flags that wouldn't quite fit what you were looking for if you were to do it again?
I think I certainly wouldn't do anything with a test at the end. That's for sure. I think I think you don't need to put yourself under that pressure. I think you just want a relaxed class where you're with people who are in a very similar situation to yourself. I think that's the kind of main thing, is to find something like that. I think you've got different, from what I found, you've got, kind of the fun, I guess what you call pet gun dog classes. You've got kind of that side of things. And then you've got more the kind of club, really kind of advancing on to potentially, taking a dog onto the field. And the two are very different. And I think you've got to kind of make that assessment in terms of your dog, is that, is your dog really going to go on to be a dog that, you kind of take shooting with you, or you're going to pick up with, or that side of things? Or is it really more about just having an hour with your dog, but get to sleep for the rest of the day, you come back with ideas, you get to enjoy yourself, meet other people, and you kind of got to make the decision in terms of what you want. And the dog's going to be a huge part of that, right? Bonnie was never bred to go into the field. She's got a part of her that would love to, but she's also part of her that, is a kind of a pet. With a different dog, I think the other side would be completely the right decision, and actually doing maybe the kind of pet gun dog would be the worst decision you could make. So I think it really just depends upon that situation and what's going to work for you, but also what you think you are able to manage as well. Because I think the worst thing you can do is put yourself under that pressure, the dog feeling that pressure, and then that's when things really start to kind of fall apart very quickly.
And I think also you don't want to introduce this wonderful new skill of gun dog work to your dog and then really take to it and really love it if you're not going to be able to sustain it, because then you're almost teasing your dog with, this is
Yeah.
what you could have done, this is the fun you could have had.
Yeah.
So you must make sure you're finding a training class or a style of gun dog type work you want to do that you can sustain and that you can enjoy and have fun with as well. What do you think life would be like with Bonnie if you hadn't have ventured into this world of kind of gun dog for fun type work?
I was thinking about this. I was looking back at your previous episodes when you asked this question. Honestly, I honestly don't think she'd be here. I honestly think it was, I can't even begin to imagine what it'd be like. Unimaginable is the word. I hate to even think what would have happened. One, she's a big girl. I think during like the Christmas holidays, she was up at like 36 kg. Now she's about 32 kg. She's a big girl. I couldn't even imagine what it'd be like where she wasn't under control. She was unruly, all these different things. I can't even begin to imagine. If you can't train, I don't know what you do. I don't know what people do. I honestly don't in these situations. I really don't. I have no idea what happens.
To give listeners a really clear, contrasting view, just describe what Bonnie is like right now, this week. Is she a dream to have around? Does she still have her quirks?
Quirks, not so much. Like, she is a wonderful companion. It's great fun to be with. I look forward to, we walk in our big walk is in the morning. And I really look forward to those. I love it. We go running 3 times a week. Every second day we go running. She's my running partner, has been for the last couple of years. I love going out with her. Um, so that side of it, I've got I've got my kind of friend, who's always kind of with me. I love going out with her. Every time, I'm always thinking of new things we can do. I watch something, I'm, oh my God, I could do that there. I'm wondering if I could throw it there. I wonder if I could send, I'm constantly kind of thinking of things that we can do. And she's just, in the house, she is wonderful. She's got the kind of most incredible kind of off switch, almost to the point where she's incredibly lazy in the house, except obviously if she hears the rustle of a bag or so on. She's obviously devout food lover. She's incredibly loving. And she's just brilliant. She's absolutely wonderful. Like, even sleeping, we had her in the crate really for a couple of years. And then it was only recently, she's out of the crate in her dog bed in the kitchen now. The other night we tried to bring her up to the bedroom to sleep. I think the kids had, it was a World Cup, so they had late night games. Kids were there, so we'll have her sleep with us because we'll fall asleep anyway. And she didn't want to sleep with us. She wanted to go downstairs, have her own space, and kind of, not be. And she's wonderful. She is an amazing dog. She's great fun to be with. She has her quirks, absolutely. Her quirks are probably more around, she loves to guard the property. So if you're out the front, anybody walks past, but again, you call her back and she's fine. She just wants to do her. I think she just thinks she's doing a great job. It's like, look, I'm doing this great job here. And that's probably one of her quirks. She sometimes doesn't like people in hats, bizarrely. I don't know why. High vis, sometimes she likes it, sometimes she doesn't.
Never trust a person in a high vis and a hat. They're always wrong. And you've really nicely described Bonnie now. And you, again, you're saying it with a smile on your face as you talk about it. So I can see she is like a real good mate to you. But at the beginning, you described that you found it really, really tough. So what would you say to yourself if it was that weird situation where you were having a chat with yourself when Bonnie was 6 months old and you were feeling kind of a little bit low about the fact you've got this puppy and you're kind of struggling? What advice would you have given yourself?
I think a lot of it is probably like trust the process. You've got to trust the process. You've got to keep going. You've got to be consistent. You've got to have boundaries. You've got to get the foundations right. You've got to keep going. Even if there's no results, even if it looks completely kind of fruitless, you've just got to keep going, because there'll be that day where you're like, how did that happen? She's never done that before. And then it just suddenly starts to happen. Things start to take off really quickly. At least that was my experience. And would I have listened to you back then? Probably not. I probably wouldn't have listened to that comment. But I now know is that you've got to trust the process. You've got to go through it. You've got to do your best. You've got to stay consistent. Don't give up. Keep going, and it will all be worth it. And I think when you get that kind of bond, there's nothing quite like that bond. It's incredible. It's great fun. And that's worth sticking in there for, right? Is that bond.
Very wise words. Would you get a Goldador again, or have you been put off, or are you now absolutely smitten with that breeding type?
No, I'm definitely I would say I'm definitely more on the lab side. I think kind of lab Goldador. I think I love the kind of the working side. I love the dog. I love Bonnie and the fact she's got a bit of drive in her. I think, when I've been to some of these classes and you've got maybe like the show lab where there's not very much drive, you chuck the ball, whatever it is. And it's like, that's not what I want. I actually want a bit of a challenge. I do enjoy, as much as what I've said, I enjoy the challenge. That's why I'm still here. That's why we're talking right now. I've loved the challenge, and that's been a big part of it as well. Is I've enjoyed that side of it. I knew I could always overcome it. Maybe I didn't always know, but I didn't want to give up. I always knew that if I keep going, there's going to be something at the end of this. That's what I kept kind of telling myself, kept thinking of kind of what was at the end of it. And I think that's kind of what, kind of got us there. But I think, yeah, that's definitely kind of hanging there. It's, it's all kind of worth it.
I don't think when we're in that situation, though, we really notice as Labrador or dog owners, we don't really notice the improvements as they're happening, because it can sometimes be such it's like a a slow drip, drip, drip effect. But then all of a sudden, all those drips that have gone into that knowledge bucket of your dog, suddenly the bucket's full and you go, actually, it's all just kind of fallen into place.
Ye-
And sometimes that can be a matter of weeks, months, and for some dogs, it's a long time. But as long as you keep putting drips in that bucket, you will eventually kind of get the finished article. Did you ever feel like giving up before you'd put all those drips in?
At one point, I did honestly think that Bonnie was going to be in a lead for the rest of her life. I honestly thought that, and I went through quite a long, what felt like a long period. It was probably like, a couple of weeks, but it felt like forever. I was just like, this is what life is like. We're always going to be a long line. She's always going to chase after other dogs. She's always going to do this. This is what it's always going to be like. So, absolutely, you kind of have those, kind of down moments. And, but I think one of the key, you kind of mentioned it there, one of the things, I kind of go back to your last question, kind of telling myself is that I think you've got to, when you look back, you got to not think about the negatives all the time. You've got to also recognize the good things, like, where have you improved? Where have things kind of really been going well? And I think you've got to kind of enjoy those wins. You've got to recognize them. You've got to kind of, give yourself a bit of the pat on the back for doing those things, because if you focus on the negative, it is always going to be negative, but there's always bound to be things in there that are positive you can kind of, draw from and to kind of help keep you going, for sure.
The positives are often difficult to spot when you're in that spiral of feeling really
Yeah.
low about it.
Yeah.
And I would say to people, get someone else to look, get a fresh set of eyes on what you're doing. It doesn't have to be a professional trainer, but it's got to be someone that is not necessarily emotionally attached to what's going on, that can kind of give you a bit of clarity that what you're doing is the right thing, or actually some gentle advice in the right direction to say you need to do something different to get the better relationship with your dog. And you had that from several different trainers, and it sounds like you've watched social media quite a lot and you've seen lots of different things that are good for dogs. Looking back at the relationship you have with Bonnie and the things you've achieved with her, what would you say you are now most proud of, that you look back with fond memories?
Gosh, that's a good question. Oh gosh, so many things. Look, I think as difficult as it was doing that first Gundog kind of exam, I still showed up. I turned up, and believe me, I nearly didn't turn up to that because I was just like, this is just horrendous. It's going to be a disaster. So I think actually kind of turning up and doing that and doing my best, that was, that was a big thing. And I think really just kind of keeping going with the training, even if it's silly things like, you're going to put the coffee machine on, do some do some sits, do some kind of, stay work, do some heel work, just doing things like that. Uh, I think, again, kind of doing the kind of the next Gundog classes, doing the next set of exams, kind of proud of doing those. Because again, what's incredible is you do these things, they're not particularly difficult. They're really not. But to do them with people watching you, an examiner, getting it right at that place, at that time, in front of those people is incredibly hard. And I don't, you never really know, well, you've got no control over what's going to happen. You sort of turn up and you do all the right things and you've got no clue how things are going to happen. You don't know how it's going to roll out. And I think now is, in terms of what I'm proud of now is, I kind of like to think I give her the best life possible. I'm kind of proud of that side of it. I like to think she has a very varied life. She has, a very active life. I like to think that she's content. I like to think that, she's done, we've done lots of great things with her. We got to see my parents a couple of times a year, stay up there for a week. We've taken her on various holidays, Cotswolds, we've got to the Lake District with her. We've done weekends away with her. She comes everywhere with us. I take her to the shops with me. We do all these different things. She really is kind of that dog. We take her everywhere. We do everything with her. And, I'm proud of the fact that, we've kind of hung in there on things that are very difficult, things that are easy to say, oh, do you know what's easy? It's easier just not to bring her. Let's just leave her. And also even things like leaving her at home, it's really easy to then do the opposite and take her everywhere. And actually what's amazing is being able to have the kind of willpower to say, right, we're just going to leave her for an hour. We're going to do 2 hours, and kind of you practice that side of it. So, I think from doing all these things, we've kind of, for me, she's a great dog. I know that's kind of, everyone's got their own idea of a great dog, but for us, she fits in incredibly well with our family. And, I'm very proud that we've kind of created a kind of shaped her to be the way that she is.
You've ended up with the go anywhere dog, which you've just
Mm.
described, and that doesn't come by chance. There's very few go anywhere dogs that just come out the packet like that. There's lots of work that goes into it. A lot of your Gundog work and actually the adventures that you have with Bonnie every day, I know you post on your socials because I enjoy watching them. We'll have listeners that will probably want to see what you get up to with Bonnie. Where can they find you on Instagram to follow your journey?
Yep. Instagram name is Pete Campbell 606. They just give you an idea of the kind of things you can do with your dog, the kind of fun you can have, and just hopefully kind of gives other people ideas of things that they can do. And also it's nice to kind of track progress, isn't it? You kind of, when I look back, it's a nice way of, of kind of seeing that, things are kind of trending the way that you would like them to. And, that's really kind of why I put the videos up there.
And the beauty of social media, if you're posting honestly, you are showing the good and the bad. And I'm sure actually you have not only a lot of fun, but you have good days and bad days. And it's good for people to see those when things don't go quite to plan. And I really appreciate your honesty about everything you've said, but particularly the emotional side of owning a young Labrador. There will be loads of people that feel quite isolated. Lots of listeners I know go through that phase, and hopefully your words will just show them that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Pete, thank you so much for joining me today. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Labrador Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Labrador Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word and share it with another Labrador owner. You can find the Labrador Podcast and Tales of Success Labrador training on socials or by visiting talesofsuccess.com. Until next time, enjoy making memories with your own Labrador.